The rain had started before dawn, a slow, persistent rhythm against the windows that seemed to match the heaviness in Marcus Chen's chest. He sat in the cramped office of the estate lawyer, surrounded by mahogany furniture that smelled of old paper and dust, watching the man across the desk shuffle through documents with the practiced efficiency of someone who had delivered bad news 1,000 times before. "Your uncle left everything to you," the lawyer said, his voice carrying no emotion, as if he were reading a grocery list. "The warehouse, the property it sits on." If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today, and whatever contents remain inside. Marcus nodded slowly, his throat tight. Uncle Raymond had been dead for 3 weeks now, and the funeral had been small, attended by only a handful of people who remembered him from the old days. The family had always kept their distance from Raymond, treating him like an embarrassment, a man who had wasted his potential on what they called obsessions and paranoia. "There's one condition," the lawyer continued, adjusting his glasses. "The warehouse must remain sealed until you, specifically, open it. Your uncle was very explicit about this in his will." The words hung in the air between them. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, remembering the last time he had seen his uncle alive, 6 months ago at a family gathering. Raymond had pulled him aside, his weathered hands gripping Marcus's shoulders with surprising strength. "When I'm gone," he had whispered, his eyes intense and urgent, "promise me you'll be the one to open the warehouse. Not your father, not your brothers. You're the only one who might understand," Marcus had promised, not knowing it would be the last conversation they would ever have. Now, driving through the industrial district on the east side of town, Marcus felt that promise weighing on him like a physical burden. The warehouse district was a graveyard of rust and forgotten ambitions, where old factories stood like tombstones against the grey sky. His uncle's warehouse sat at the end of a dead-end street, a massive structure of corrugated metal and concrete that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The building was larger than he remembered from his childhood, when Uncle Raymond would occasionally bring him here, always stopping at the entrance, never letting him inside. "Not yet," Raymond would say with that strange, sad smile. "Someday, maybe, but not yet." Marcus pulled his car up to the chain-link fence that surrounded the property. The gate was secured with a heavy padlock, and weeds had grown up through the cracked asphalt of the yard. A faded sign hung crookedly from the fence. "Chen Storage. Private property. No trespassing." He stepped out into the drizzle, the keys from the lawyer's office jangling in his hand. The air smelled of wet concrete and rust, mixed with something else he couldn't quite identify, something that reminded him of his uncle's cologne and old books. The padlock resisted at first, corroded by years of weather, but finally gave way with a metallic groan. The gate swung open on protesting hinges, and Marcus walked across the empty yard toward the warehouse entrance. The building loomed above him, its metal walls streaked with rust and peeling paint. Windows near the roofline were either broken or covered from the inside, giving the structure a blind, secretive appearance. The main door was steel, reinforced with additional locks that spoke of his uncle's obsession with security. Marcus counted 5 different locks, each requiring a separate key. His hands shook slightly as he worked through them one by one, the sound of tumblers clicking open echoing in the empty yard. When the final lock disengaged, he paused, his hand on the cold metal handle. Something about this moment felt significant, as if opening this door would change everything that came after. He thought of his family's reaction when they learned he had inherited everything. His father had been furious, his face red with indignation. "That crazy old fool," his father had spat, "wasting his life hoarding junk in that warehouse. And now he leaves it all to you? You should sell it immediately, Marcus. Tear it down. The land is probably worth something, at least." But his mother had been different. She had pulled him aside after the funeral, her eyes red from crying. "Your uncle wasn't crazy," she had said softly. "He was protecting something. I don't know what, but he believed it was important. Promise me you'll be careful." Now, standing at the threshold, Marcus understood what she meant. This wasn't just about property or inheritance. This was about trust, about a secret his uncle had guarded his entire life. He pulled the door open. The smell hit him first, a complex mixture of old paper, preservatives, and something medicinal, like formaldehyde. The interior was dark, with only thin streams of grey daylight filtering through gaps in the covered windows. He fumbled for a light switch, his fingers finding it on the wall beside the entrance. When the lights flickered on, his breath caught in his throat. The warehouse was massive, its ceiling rising 30 feet above him, supported by steel beams that disappeared into shadow. But what filled the space made him forget about the architecture entirely. Rows upon rows of wooden crates and metal shelving units stretched before him, each one labeled with neat, handwritten tags in his uncle's distinctive script. The organization was meticulous, almost obsessive, each item catalogued and preserved with extraordinary care. Marcus took a hesitant step inside, his shoes echoing on the concrete floor. The nearest shelf held what appeared to be documents, each one sealed in protective plastic sleeves and arranged chronologically. He pulled one out at random and found himself looking at a yellowed newspaper from 1943, the headline screaming about Allied victories in Europe. But as he looked closer, he noticed something strange. Certain articles had been circled in red ink, and in the margins, his uncle had written notes. Confirmed. Family Schmidt relocated. List incomplete. Verify through Red Cross. Marcus moved deeper into the warehouse, his confusion growing with each step. The next section held boxes, labeled with locations. Berlin, 1945. Warsaw, 1944. Budapest, 1943. Inside one box, he found photographs. Hundreds of them, showing faces he didn't recognize. Men, women, children, all staring at the camera with expressions that ranged from hope to desperation to fear. On the back of each photograph, someone had written names, dates, and locations in multiple languages. His hands trembled as he set the photographs down and moved to the next section. Here, the shelves held what appeared to be personal items: watches, jewelry, letters tied with faded ribbon, children's toys, religious artifacts. Each item was tagged with the same meticulous care, noting where it had been, found, when, and by whom. "What were you doing, Uncle Raymond?" Marcus whispered into the silence. He found the answer in the center of the warehouse, where a large wooden desk sat beneath a single hanging light bulb. The desk was neat, organized, with stacks of ledgers arranged by year. Marcus sat down in the worn chair and opened the first ledger, dated 1978. The pages were filled with lists of names, addresses, and detailed notes. As he read, the truth slowly revealed itself, each entry adding another piece to an impossible puzzle. His uncle hadn't been hoarding junk. He had been running a private recovery operation, tracking down and preserving artifacts, documents, and personal effects that had been lost, stolen, or scattered during World War II. For more than 40 years, Raymond Chen had dedicated his life to finding items that belonged to families destroyed by the Holocaust, war crimes, and displacement. Marcus's vision blurred with tears as he read entry after entry. His uncle had traveled across Europe, Asia, and South America, following leads, interviewing survivors, purchasing items from estate sales and black market dealers, always with the goal of preservation and eventual return to rightful owners or their descendants. In one entry from 1985, "If you find this story engaging, Please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Raymond had written, "Found the Goldstein family menorah in an antique shop in Prague. The dealer didn't know its significance, paid 3 times its market value. The Goldsteins had 3 children who perished at Auschwitz, but one survived. Currently searching for descendants in Israel. This piece deserves to go home." The scale of the operation was staggering. Marcus stood and walked the aisles again, this time understanding what he was seeing. This wasn't a warehouse. It was a museum, a memorial, a rescue mission that had continued in secret for decades. He found a section dedicated entirely to children's items. Dolls, books, school assignments, photographs of birthday parties, and family gatherings. Each one represented a life interrupted, a childhood stolen. His uncle had preserved them all, treating each artifact with the reverence it deserved. In the far corner of the warehouse, Marcus discovered something that made his heart stop. Behind a curtain made of heavy canvas, hidden from casual view, was a small office space that his uncle had clearly lived in for extended periods. A cot sat against one wall, neatly made. A small kitchen area held a hot plate and a few dishes. Bookshelves lined every available wall space, filled with volumes in multiple languages: German, Polish, Hebrew, Russian. On one shelf, Marcus found leather-bound journals, dozens of them, each one filled with his uncle's handwriting. He pulled out the earliest volume, dated 1975, and began to read. "I cannot erase what happened," Raymond had written on the first page. "I cannot bring back the dead or undo the horrors of the past, but I can remember, I can preserve, I can make sure that these people, these families, these lives are not forgotten. If no one else will do this work, then I will. For as long as I live, I will be their guardian." The journal went on to detail how Raymond's mission had begun. As a young man, he had served in the military and been stationed in Germany during the late 1962. There, he had met an elderly Jewish woman named Sarah Klein, who had survived the concentration camps but lost her entire family. She had shown him a photograph, the only thing she had left from before the war, and told him about all the other items that had been taken, scattered, lost forever. "She looked at me with such sadness," Raymond had written, "and she said, 'Who will remember us when we are gone? Who will tell our children's stories?' That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the families like hers, all the lost histories, all the forgotten lives, and I knew I had to do something." Marcus read through journal after journal, watching his uncle's mission evolve over the decades. Raymond had taught himself multiple languages, studied art history and archival science, built a network of contacts across 3 continents. He had spent his entire personal fortune on this work, living frugally, avoiding romantic relationships, keeping his family at arm's length because he knew they wouldn't understand. "My brother calls me crazy," one entry from 1988 read. "He says I'm wasting my life on dead people's junk. He doesn't understand that these aren't just objects. They're souls. They're memories. They're proof that these people existed, that they mattered, that they were loved. Someone has to remember. Someone has to care." As Marcus continued reading, he discovered more layers to his uncle's operation. Raymond hadn't worked entirely alone. Over the years, he had built a quiet network of helpers, retired historians, volunteer researchers, survivors who became partners in the mission. Their names appeared throughout the journals, along with notes of gratitude and collaboration. One entry from 1992 mentioned a woman named Dr. Helena Kovacs, a Hungarian historian who had helped Raymond trace artifacts looted from Budapest during the war. "Helena understands what I'm doing," Raymond had written. She lost her own grandparents in the camps. She said this work is holy, that every item we save is a soul we redeem. I've never thought of it that way, but perhaps she's right. Marcus made a note to find Dr. Kovacs if she was still alive. These people would want to know that Raymond's work was being discovered, that it would continue. As he explored further, Marcus found a locked filing cabinet in the corner of the office. Using the keys from the lawyer's envelope, he opened it to find meticulously organized files on what Raymond had called priority returns. These were cases where he had located families but hadn't yet made contact, or where negotiations for the return of items were still ongoing. The top file was labeled Rosenberg, Urge. Inside, Marcus found everything his uncle had compiled about Ruth Rosenberg and her father's pocket watch. There were photographs of the watch from multiple angles, authentication documents from 3 separate experts, a detailed provenance showing how it had passed from owner to owner since 1943, and most touchingly, a draft letter Raymond had written but never sent. "Dear Mrs. Rosenberg," the letter began. "You don't know me, but I have been searching for you for 3 years. I have something that belonged to your father." Marcus set the draft aside, his vision blurring. His uncle had been so close. Just a few more months, and he would have made that connection himself. Now it would fall to Marcus to complete what Raymond had started. The next file was labeled Bergman Family, Vienna. Marcus opened it to find documentation about a collection of 7 paintings that had been stolen from a Jewish art collector in 1938. Raymond had tracked down 5 of the 7, the paintings over the course of 15 years, purchasing them from various sources and storing them in a climate-controlled room at the back of the warehouse. The notes indicated that the Bergman family had no surviving members. All had perished in the camps. But Raymond had discovered a great-niece living in New York, the daughter of a cousin who had emigrated to America before the war. The paintings, Raymond had calculated, were worth approximately $8 million. These should go to Rebecca Bergman, Raymond had written. She is the only living descendant. The paintings belonged to her great-uncle Solomon, who died at Treblinka. Let something beautiful survive the darkness. Marcus sat back in the chair, overwhelmed. This was bigger than he had imagined. His uncle hadn't just collected a few sentimental items. He had assembled what amounted to one of the most significant private Holocaust artifact collections in the world, all with the sole purpose of returning every piece into its rightful owners. The weight of it pressed down on Marcus's shoulders. How could he possibly continue this work? He had a career, responsibilities, a life that had nothing to do with World War II or lost families or historical preservation. But even as the doubts crowded his mind, he knew he couldn't walk away. His uncle had trusted him. More than that, these families, Ruth Rosenberg, Rebecca Bergman, and hundreds of others, deserved to know that pieces of their history had been saved. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the warehouse floor, Marcus heard his phone ringing. It was his brother David. "Hey, Marcus, Dad wanted me to check in. Have you been to the warehouse yet? What's the situation?" Marcus looked around at the shelves, the carefully preserved artifacts, the decades of meticulous work. "I'm here now," he said slowly. "It's complicated." "Complicated how? Is the building structurally sound? How much do you think the land is worth?" "David, it's not about the land. Uncle Raymond was doing something here. Something important." "Important?" David's voice took on a skeptical edge. "Marcus, don't tell me you're buying into whatever obsession he had. The man spent his whole life alone in that warehouse. That's not important. That's sad. You don't understand. No, you don't understand. We have an opportunity here to finally profit from something Uncle Raymond left behind. The industrial district is being redeveloped. That property could be worth a fortune, but only if we act quickly before the city changes the zoning laws." Marcus felt anger rising in his chest. This isn't about money. Everything is about money, Marcus. That's the real world. Look, I know you had a soft spot for Uncle Raymond, but don't let sentiment cloud your judgment. He wasted his life. Don't waste yours, too. After David hung up, Marcus sat in the silence of the warehouse, his brother's words echoing in his mind. Wasted his life. Is that what everyone thought? That 40 years of dedication, of careful preservation, of honoring the dead, all of it was waste. He stood and walked back to the shelves holding the children's items. One section contained school notebooks, filled with homework assignments and drawings. A girl named Eva Schneider had written her name carefully on the inside cover of a mathematics notebook, dated 1938. In the margins, she had drawn flowers and birds. On the last page before the entries stopped, she had written, "I am 9 years old today. Mama says we are leaving for somewhere safe. I hope there are flowers there." There were no more entries after that date. According to Raymond's notes, Eva Schneider had died at Bergen-Belsen in 1945. She was 16 years old. Marcus closed the notebook carefully and placed it back on the shelf. Wasted his life? No. His uncle had honored Eva's life by preserving her notebook, by keeping her memory alive, by refusing to let her be forgotten. As Marcus locked up the warehouse that evening, his mind was already working through the logistics. He would need to take time off work, probably a lot of it. He would need to educate himself quickly about Holocaust artifacts, provenance research, and repatriation processes. He would need to find the people in Raymond's network and learn from them. Most importantly, he would need to start making the returns. These items had been waiting too long already. Over the next week, Marcus threw himself into understanding the full scope of his uncle's work. He spent 12-hour days in the warehouse, reading through every journal, cataloging every file, beginning to grasp the magnitude of what Raymond had built. He discovered that his uncle had maintained detailed records, not just of artifacts, but of the stories behind them. For each item, Raymond had researched the original owners, documented what had happened to them, and tracked down any surviving family members. The database was extraordinary, containing thousands of entries cross-referenced by name, location, item type, and family connections. One evening, while going through files from the 1992nd, Marcus found a series of letters exchanged between Raymond and various Holocaust museums and memorial organizations. Several had offered to acquire Raymond's entire collection, offering substantial sums of money. Raymond had politely declined every offer. "This collection is not for sale," he had written to the director of one prominent museum. "These items belong to families, not institutions. My role is not to collect, but to return. I am merely the temporary guardian of things that should go home." The more Marcus learned, the more he realized that his uncle had developed expertise that rivaled many professional historians. Raymond had become fluent in 6 languages. He had built relationships with archivists in 24 countries. He had developed authentication techniques that several experts had consulted him about. But he had done it all quietly, never seeking recognition, never publishing papers or giving interviews. For Raymond, this had never been about personal achievement. It had been about the sacred duty of remembrance. Marcus also discovered that his uncle had set aside funds to continue the work after his death. In a bank account that Marcus now had access to, Raymond had saved nearly $200,000, carefully invested over the years. There was also a life insurance policy with Marcus, named as the beneficiary, another $150,000. A letter attached to the insurance documents explained Raymond's thinking. "This money is not for you personally, Marcus, though you may use what you need. It is for the work, for authentication services, for travel to meet families, for proper storage and preservation. Use it wisely. Use it to finish what I could not." On the 8th day, Marcus made his first phone call. He dialed the number for Ruth Rosenberg in Toronto, his heart pounding. An elderly woman answered on the third ring. "Hello? Mrs. Rosenberg? My name is Marcus Chen. I believe I have something that belonged to your father." The silence that followed was so long that Marcus thought the call had been disconnected. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "What did you say?" Over the next hour, Marcus explained everything. He told her about Uncle Raymond, about the warehouse, about the pocket watch. He sent her photographs via email, watched through video chat as she examined them with trembling hands. "That's his watch," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I remember it. He wore it every day. On the back, there should be Hebrew letters. They're my grandparents' initials." Marcus had already checked. Aleph Shin. Avraham and Sarah. Ruth Rosenberg wept openly. "He was wearing it the day they separated us at the train station. He tried to give it to me, but the guard knocked it from his hand. I thought, it was lost forever. All these years. My uncle found it," Marcus said softly. "He kept it safe for you. He was going to contact you, but he passed away before he could." "What was his name?" "Your uncle? Raymond Chen. I want to know everything about him." "Will you tell me?" "Yes," Marcus promised. "I'll tell you everything." They arranged for Marcus to fly to Toronto the following week to deliver the watch in person. After they hung up, Marcus sat in the warehouse office for a long time, feeling the weight and wonder of what had just happened. Somewhere in heaven, he thought, Uncle Raymond was smiling. The call with Ruth Rosenberg changed everything. Suddenly, the abstract concept of returning artifacts to families became viscerally real. Marcus had heard the emotion in her voice, seen the tears on her face, felt the power of memory made tangible. This wasn't just about objects. It was about healing, about connection, about making the past present again in the most meaningful way possible. He spent the next several days preparing for the trip to Toronto, but also beginning to plan for the longer term. If he was going to do this properly, he would need help. He started by reaching out to the people mentioned in Raymond's journals, hoping at least some of them were still alive and willing to assist. His first email was to Dr. Helena Kovacs, the Hungarian historian his uncle had worked with. He composed the message carefully, explaining who he was, how his uncle had died, and his intention to continue the work. He included several scans from Raymond's journals, where her name appeared, hoping she would remember him fondly. The response came within hours, and it was more than Marcus could have hoped for. "Dear Marcus," Dr. Kovacs wrote, "I was heartbroken to learn of Raymond's passing. He was a remarkable man, driven by a moral clarity that is rare in this world. I worked with him for over 20 years, and I can tell you, without exaggeration, that he saved hundreds of families from losing their history forever. Please call me at your earliest convenience. I want to help you continue his work. Raymond once told me that if anything happened to him, you were the one he trusted most. I can see why. Helena." They spoke on the phone the next day. Dr. Kovacs, now in her 70s, lived in Budapest but traveled frequently for her research. She explained that she had been part of a loose international network of scholars and activists who had quietly supported Raymond's mission over the years. "We called ourselves the Guardians," she said, her English accented but perfect. "There were maybe 20 of us at various times. Historians, archivists, some descendants of survivors. Raymond was the heart of it all, the one who actually did the preservation work. The rest of us helped with research, authentication, tracking down families." "Are the others still active?" Marcus asked. "Some. I can put you in touch. But Marcus, you should know, is something. What your uncle was doing. It was not always legal. Strictly speaking. Sometimes he had to purchase items from questionable sources. Sometimes he had to operate in gray areas of international law. He did it because he believed the moral imperative outweighed the legal complications. But if you continue this work, You may face challenges. Questions about provenance, about ownership, about the right to possess these items. Marcus had already considered this. I don't want to possess them. I want to return them. I know. But returning them isn't always simple. Sometimes there are multiple claimants. Sometimes the current legal owners resist. Sometimes governments get involved. Raymond navigated these challenges brilliantly, but it took him years to learn how. You'll need guidance. Will you help me? Of course. I'll do whatever I can. Raymond was my dear friend, and this work is my life's passion as well. You won't be alone in this, Marcus. None of us will let his legacy end. After speaking with Dr. Kovacs, Marcus felt a surge of hope. He wasn't inheriting just a warehouse and a mission. He was inheriting a community of people who understood and supported what needed to be done. His trip to Toronto was profoundly moving. Ruth Rosenberg met him at her apartment, a small, neat space filled with photographs of family, her children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. She was 86 years old, her hands gnarled with arthritis, but her eyes were sharp and alert. Marcus had wrapped the pocket watch carefully in a wooden presentation box. When he handed it to her, she opened it slowly, her hands shaking. The moment she saw the watch, she gasped, bringing her hand to her mouth. "Papa," she whispered. "Oh, Papa." She held it carefully, turning it over to read the Hebrew inscription on the back. Tears fell freely down her lined face. Marcus felt his own eyes burning. "I never thought I would see this again," she said. "I never thought I would hold something he held. Do you understand what this means to me? I think I'm beginning to," Marcus replied quietly. They spent hours together. Ruth told him about her father, about their life before the war, about the day they were torn apart at the train station. She showed him photographs, documents, the small fragments of her family's history that had survived. And she told him about her life after the war, how she had been liberated, how she had made her way to Canada, how she had built a new family while never forgetting the one she lost. "Your uncle," she said at one point. "He must have been a very special person to dedicate his life to this." "He was," Marcus said, "though I didn't fully understand it until now. Will you continue his work?" The question hung in the air. Marcus looked at the pocket watch, now resting in Ruth's palm, and thought about the hundreds of other items still in the warehouse, all waiting for their moment to go home. "Yes," he said, "I will." Ruth smiled through her tears. Then he chose well. Before Marcus left, Ruth introduced him to her family. 3 generations gathered to see the miraculous return of their ancestors' watch. Her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren all wanted to hear the story, to understand how this impossible thing had happened. Marcus told them about Raymond, about the warehouse, about 40 years of quiet dedication. Ruth's eldest son, a man named David Marcus, noted the coincidence of the name with grim humor, approached him as he was leaving. "What you're doing," he said, "continuing your uncle's work. It matters more than you know. My mother has lived with absence her whole life. Absence of family, absence of history, absence of any tangible connection to who she was before the war. You gave her back a piece of herself today. That's priceless." On the flight home, Marcus looked out the window at the clouds below and felt the full weight of his decision settling over him. He was going to quit his job. He was going to dedicate himself fully to the warehouse, to the returns, to the mission his uncle had entrusted to him. His family would think he was crazy, just as they had thought Raymond was crazy, but that didn't matter anymore. Some things were more important than conventional success. Some things were more important than money or status or the approval of people who couldn't understand. Raymond had known this. Ruth Rosenberg knew this. And now, finally, Marcus knew it too. When he returned to the warehouse, he found a surprise waiting. His mother was there, sitting on the steps by the entrance. a thermos of coffee beside her. "Mom, what are you doing here?" She stood, brushing off her pants. "Your father told me about your call with David, about how you said the warehouse was important. I wanted to see it for myself." Marcus hesitated. He hadn't been ready to show the family yet, hadn't been ready for their judgment and incomprehension. But something in his mother's expression stopped his protests. She looked at him with the same gentleness she had shown at the funeral, when she had told him to be careful. "Okay," he said. "Come inside." He led her through the warehouse, explaining as they went. He showed her the shelves of documents, the preserved artifacts, the meticulous records. He explained about Raymond's mission, about the network of helpers, about the families waiting to reclaim their history. He told her about Ruth Rosenberg and the pocket watch. His mother walked silently through the aisles, stopping occasionally to read a label or examine an item more closely. She didn't interrupt, didn't question, just listened and looked. When they reached Raymond's office space, she sat down in his chair and picked up one of the journals, reading a few passages at random. Finally, she spoke. "I always knew there was more to what Raymond was doing. When we were children, he was always the kindest one. The one who cried at movies, who brought home stray animals, who couldn't stand to see anyone suffering. Our father used to say he was too soft for the real world." She set the journal down carefully. "But he wasn't too soft. He was strong enough to care when no one else did. Strong enough to spend 40 years on something that would never make him rich or famous. Strong enough to work in silence and secrecy, because the work itself was the reward." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "You understand? I understand that my son is his uncle's nephew," she said, smiling sadly. "I saw it in your face at the funeral, the way you looked at him in the casket. You were the only one who seemed to really be saying goodbye to someone you loved, not just someone you were related to. Dad thinks I'm throwing my life away if I continue this. Your father measures life in dollars and promotions. He always has. But you and I both know there are other ways to measure a life." She stood and hugged him tightly. "I'm proud of you, Marcus. And Raymond would be too." Over the following weeks, Marcus began the process of transforming his life. He gave notice at his job, enduring his supervisor's confusion and his colleagues' concerned questions. He moved into the apartment above the warehouse that he had only just discovered existed. Raymond had converted the old administrative offices into a modest living space years ago. He used some of Raymond's funds to hire a professional archivist to help properly catalogue the entire collection. He consulted with lawyers about the legal complexities of international artifact repatriation. He enrolled in online courses in art history, Holocaust studies, and cultural property law. Most importantly, he began reaching out to families. Using Raymond's meticulously maintained database, he started working through the priority returns file, making contact with descendants, arranging for authentication and delivery of items. Each return was its own unique experience. Some families wept with joy. Others received the items in stunned silence, unable to process the miracle of recovery. A few were angry that it had taken so long, though that anger usually faded when they learned the full story of Raymond's dedication. Marcus returned a wedding dress to a woman in Israel whose grandmother had sewn it herself in Poland in 1936. He delivered a collection of family letters to a man in Argentina whose grandfather had been killed in the Warsaw Ghetto. He flew to Berlin to return a menorah to a family that had 4 generations gather to receive it, lighting it together for the first time. In 80 years, word began to spread. Families who had given up hope of ever recovering lost artifacts started reaching out to Marcus, asking if by some miracle their items might be in Raymond's collection. Media outlets picked up the story. A local newspaper ran a feature titled "The Guardian's Nephew, Continuing a 40-Year Mission of Memory." The publicity was both helpful and challenging. It brought attention to the work, attracted volunteers and donors, and helped locate more families. But it also attracted the interest of Marcus's extended family, who suddenly saw potential value in what they had previously dismissed as worthless. His father showed up at the warehouse one day with a lawyer in tow. "Marcus, we need to talk about the estate," his father said, not bothering with pleasantries. "You can't just unilaterally decide to turn this property into some kind of charity operation. The family has rights." "Actually, Dad, I can. Uncle Raymond left everything to me specifically. The will is very clear. Wills can be contested, especially when the heir is acting irresponsibly. A warehouse full of stolen artifacts. They're not stolen," Marcus said firmly. "They were recovered, rescued, preserved, and they're being returned to their rightful owners. That's not irresponsible. That's honoring Uncle Raymond's wishes." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Chen, your father has asked me to review the possibility of having you declared incompetent to manage the estate. Given that you've quit your job and moved into a warehouse, get out," Marcus said quietly. "Both of you. This is private property, and you're not welcome here." His father's face flushed red. "You're making a mistake, Marcus. You're throwing away your future for a dead man's obsession." "No, Dad. I'm building my future on a good man's legacy. There's a difference. And if you can't see that, then we have nothing more to discuss." After they left, Marcus's hands shook with anger and adrenaline. But beneath the anger was a core of certainty. He was doing the right thing. He knew it with every fiber of his being. His mother returned that evening, bringing dinner. They ate together in the warehouse office, surrounded by decades of careful documentation and preserved memories. "Your father is talking about legal action," she said. "I know. He can't win. The will is airtight. But he'll try. And it will be ugly." Marcus nodded. "I'm prepared for that." His mother was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking. You're going to need help. This is too big for one person." "I have help. Dr. Kovacs in Budapest? Other members of Raymond's network? I mean, family help? Someone you can trust completely." She met his eyes. "I'm offering." Marcus stared at her. "You want to work here?" "I'm retired. Your father and we've been growing apart for years. This thing with the warehouse is just the latest symptom of a much deeper problem. He sees the world one way, I see it another. And I'm tired of pretending I agree with him just to keep the peace. Mom, you don't have to choose between Dad and me. I'm not choosing between you," she said gently. "I'm choosing what kind of person I want to be, what kind of legacy I want to leave. Your Uncle Raymond spent 40 years making the world a better place in the quietest, most humble way possible. I've spent 40 years making dinner and keeping my opinions to myself. Maybe it's time I did something that matters." Marcus felt tears pricking his eyes. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." And so his mother became his first official staff member, helping him manage the administrative side of the operation while he focused on research and family outreach. Together, they established the Raymond Chen Memorial Foundation, formally creating the non-profit structure that would allow the work to continue long-term. The foundation's mission statement was simple: to preserve, protect, and return cultural artifacts displaced by war and persecution to their rightful families and descendants, ensuring that memory survives even when those who remember do not. Dr. Kovacs flew in from Budapest to help them set up proper archival protocols. Other members of Raymond's network contributed their expertise. Slowly, what had been one man's private mission became a collaborative effort involving dozens of people across multiple countries. The warehouse itself was transformed. Professional archivists reorganized the collection using international standards. Climate control systems were installed to better preserve fragile items. The space was divided into sections: receiving, authentication, storage, and a small museum area where families could come to view items before taking them home. 6 months after Marcus had first opened the warehouse doors, The foundation held its official public launch. More than 300 people attended, including dozens of families who had received items, members of Raymond's network, and representatives from Holocaust museums and memorial organizations. Ruth Rosenberg flew in from Toronto, her father's pocket watch on a chain around her neck. She gave a speech that left no one unmoved. "For 78 years," she said, her voice wavering but strong, "I lived with empty spaces where my family should have been. Empty photo albums, empty memory boxes, empty places at the table." Raymond Chen spent 40 years of his life filling those empty spaces for families like mine. He worked in silence and secrecy, never asking for recognition, never seeking praise. He simply did what was right because it was right. That is the definition of a righteous person. And now his nephew Marcus is continuing that sacred work. We must support him. We must help him. Because this matters. Memory matters. Family matters. And love, true love, refuses to let go. Even across decades, even across death itself. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Marcus barely heard it. He was looking at the crowd, at all these people who had been touched by his uncle's work, and feeling the magnitude of what Raymond had built. This wasn't just about objects or artifacts. It was about healing, about connection, about insisting that every life matters and every story deserves to be told. As the event wound down and people began to leave, an elderly man approached Marcus. He was in his 90s, walking with a cane, accompanied by a younger woman who appeared to be his daughter. "Mr. Chen," the old man said in accented English, "my name is David Bergman. I believe your uncle had some paintings that belonged to my family." Marcus's heart skipped. The Bergman paintings. He had been searching for Rebecca Bergman, not knowing there was another family member. "Yes," Marcus said. "Please, come with me." He led David Bergman and his daughter to the climate-controlled storage room, where the 5 recovered paintings were kept. When Marcus unveiled them, the old man gasped, gripping his cane so tightly his knuckles went white. "These were my father's," he whispered. "I thought they were all destroyed. I thought—" His voice broke. His daughter put her arm around him as he wept. "My grandfather Solomon collected these," she explained to Marcus. "He died in the camps. We thought everything was lost. How did your uncle find them?" Marcus explained what he knew from Raymond's files. The 15-year search, the careful purchases from various sources, the authentication process. He showed them Raymond's notes, including the entry about wanting to return the paintings to Rebecca Bergman. "Rebecca is my cousin," David Bergman said. "She's in New York. She should have some of these. But there are enough for both our families." Over the next hour, they made arrangements for the paintings' return. The Bergman family didn't want all of them back for personal possession. Instead, they asked that 3 be loaned to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., so others could see them and learn from them. 2 would be divided between David and Rebecca's families. "My father would have wanted them to teach," David said. "To testify. These paintings survived the Nazis. They must serve a purpose beyond decoration." As Marcus watched the Bergman family examine the paintings their ancestor had loved, he felt his uncle's presence almost tangibly. This was why Raymond had worked in secret for 40 years, for moments exactly like this, for the look on David Bergman's face, for the sound of Rebecca's voice when she would learn her family's art had survived, for the knowledge that beauty and memory could outlast hatred and destruction. That night, after everyone had gone and the warehouse was quiet again, Marcus sat in his uncle's chair, looking out at the aisles of preserved history. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Your uncle would be so proud. I know I am." Marcus smiled, then turned to the computer and pulled up the database. There were still hundreds of items to return, hundreds of families to find, hundreds of stories waiting to be completed. The work would take years, maybe decades. Maybe it would never truly be finished. But that was okay, because this wasn't about finishing. It was about continuing. It was about the ongoing act of remembrance, the daily choice to care about the past and honor those who could no longer speak for themselves. He opened a new file and began researching the next family on the list. Outside, the city hummed with life. People rushing through their evenings, worrying about deadlines and bills, and all the urgent trivialities that fill modern existence. But here, in this warehouse, time moved differently. Here, the past and present walked hand in hand. Here, every object was a life, every label a name, every return a small victory against forgetting. Marcus worked late into the night, guided by his uncle's meticulous notes, driven by the same quiet passion that had sustained Raymond for 40 years. Someone had to remember. Someone had to care. And now, thanks to his uncle's faith and the growing community of people who understood what this work meant, that someone was not alone. The warehouse lights stayed on, keeping watch over the past, protecting it for the future, ensuring that the forgotten would never be forgotten again. Some inheritances are measured in money, but the most valuable inheritance of all is purpose, and that is what Uncle Raymond gave to Marcus. Not a warehouse full of things, but a mission full of meaning. The work would continue, but Marcus was about to discover that the warehouse still held secrets his uncle had never revealed, even in his detailed journals. It happened 3 months after the Foundation's public launch. Marcus was conducting a routine inventory check in the furthest corner of the warehouse, a section he had examined before but never thoroughly explored. Behind a set of industrial shelves, he noticed something odd about the wall. A slight discoloration in the concrete, a rectangular outline barely visible beneath decades of dust. His heart racing, Marcus moved the shelves aside with considerable effort. What he found made him catch his breath. Hidden behind a false wall was a steel door, secured with a combination lock. He had seen no mention of this in any of Raymond's journals. Marcus tried various number combinations, his uncle's birthday, significant historical dates, family anniversaries. Nothing worked. Then, on impulse, he tried the date Sarah Klein had shown Raymond that first photograph, the moment that had changed his uncle's life. The 15th of November, 1968. The lock clicked open. The room beyond was small, no more than 15 by 20 feet, but what it contained took Marcus's breath away. This wasn't just another storage area. This was Raymond's most private sanctuary, the place where he had kept the items that meant the most to him personally, the ones that had broken his heart too deeply to catalogue with clinical detachment. The walls were lined with photographs, hundreds of them, showing children. Not just any children, but the ones Raymond had been unable to save through his work. The ones who had no surviving family, no descendants to claim their belongings, no one left to remember them except him. Each photograph had a small label beneath it with a name, age, and the date and place of death. David Friedman, age 7. Bergen Belson, 1945. Anna Kowalski, age 5. Treblinka, 1943. Josef Müller, age 9. Auschwitz, 1944. The names went on and on, row after row, a gallery of lost innocence. On a table in the center of the room lay their belongings. A teddy bear, its fur worn nearly smooth from decades of being held. A child's prayer book with crayon markings inside. A small wooden horse, hand-carved, with one ear broken off. A diary written in a child's careful script, ending mid-sentence on the day of deportation. Each item was marked with the same care as everything else in the warehouse, but these tags included something additional, a handwritten note from Raymond explaining why he had kept them separate. "These are the orphans," one note read, "the ones with no family left to claim them. I cannot let them be forgotten. If I do nothing else in this life, I will remember these children. I will keep their toys safe. I will preserve their words. I will make sure that somewhere, someone knows they existed, that they were loved, that they mattered. Marcus sank into the single chair in the room, overwhelmed by the weight of so much grief. His uncle had carried this burden alone for 40 years, keeping vigil over the memories of children who had died before they could grow up, ensuring that even in death they were not abandoned. But there was more. In a locked cabinet beneath the table, Marcus found a series of notebooks different from all the others. These were Raymond's private journals, the ones he had never intended anyone to see. The entries were raw, emotional, filled with the pain and doubt that Raymond had kept hidden from the world. I had another nightmare last night. One entry from 1983 read, I saw Sarah Klein's granddaughter, the one in the photograph she showed me. She was calling for her mother, but no one came. I woke up crying. I am 50 years old, and I wake up crying over a child I never met, who died before I was born. My brother would say I am losing my mind. Perhaps he is right, but I cannot stop. These children have no one else. If I give up, who will remember them? Another entry from 1995. I found a small doll today at an estate sale in Prague. The seller had no idea where it came from, just that it had been in his grandmother's attic for decades. But I recognized it immediately from the photograph I have of the Stern family. This was Leah Stern's doll. She was 4 years old when she was taken to the camps. Her parents, her 2 brothers, all murdered. No survivors. I bought the doll and brought it back here. I cleaned it carefully, repaired its torn dress, and placed it with the others. And then I sat in this room and wept. Because what is the point? Leah Stern has been dead for 50 years. The doll cannot bring her back. It cannot undo what was done. And yet, I cannot abandon it. I cannot let it rot in someone's attic, forgotten and meaningless. Even if no one will ever claim it, even if it sits in this room forever, at least it will be honored. At least it will be remembered. Marcus read through journal after journal, watching his uncle wrestle with despair and hope, with the seeming futility of his mission and the absolute necessity of continuing it. Raymond had known his work would never be finished, that there would always be more items to find, more families to locate, more stories to tell. But he had also known that the alternative, giving up, letting the past fade into obscurity, was unthinkable. The final entry in the private journals was dated 2 weeks before Raymond's death. I am dying, and I am afraid. Not of death itself, but of leaving this work incomplete. There are still so many children in this room, so many orphans whose stories deserve to be told. I have done what I could, but it is not enough. It will never be enough. Marcus will find this room eventually, if he is truly committed to continuing my work. And when he does, I hope he will understand. These children are my true legacy, not the items I returned, as important as that work was. But these, the forgotten ones, the lost ones, the ones with no family left to claim them, they are why I started this mission. And they are what I leave in his hands. Remember them, Marcus. Please. Remember them all. Marcus sat in that hidden room for hours, surrounded by the photographs of children who would never grow old, holding their toys and reading their words, feeling the full weight of his uncle's love and grief. When he finally emerged, his mother was waiting, concern etched on her face. You've been in there for 6 hours, she said. I was starting to worry. Mom, Marcus said, his voice hoarse. I found another room. The children. He couldn't finish. She held him while he cried, this grown man weeping for children he had never met, children who had died decades before he was born, but whose loss suddenly felt unbearably present. The discovery of the hidden room changed everything for Marcus. He realized that his uncle's mission had been even larger than he had understood. It wasn't just about returning items to surviving families. It was also about bearing witness to those who had no families left, about ensuring that the most vulnerable victims of history were not forgotten simply because no one survived to remember them. He consulted with Dr. Kovacs and other members of the foundation about what to do with the orphan collection, as he had started calling it. The consensus was clear. These items should become the heart of a permanent memorial, a place where people could come to honor the children who had been lost. Over the next several months, working with museum designers and memorial architects, Marcus transformed the hidden room and the space around it into the Raymond Chen Children's Memorial. The photographs were professionally mounted and preserved. The toys and personal items were displayed in custom cases, designed to evoke bedrooms and playrooms rather than sterile museum exhibits. The goal was to help visitors see these children as they had been, alive, loved, full of potential. But Marcus went further. Using Raymond's meticulous research notes, he created detailed biographical panels for each child. Where had they lived? What had their families been like? What had they dreamed of becoming? The memorial told their stories in their own voices, using excerpts from their diaries and letters, celebrating their lives rather than simply commemorating their deaths. The day the memorial opened, more than 1,000 people came. Holocaust survivors, educators, families who had received items through the foundation, and many ordinary citizens who simply wanted to honor the children's memory. The mayor attended. Representatives from national Holocaust museums came. Television cameras recorded the ceremony. But the most profound moment came when an elderly woman approached Marcus after the opening ceremony. She was in her 80s, leaning heavily on a walker, but her eyes were sharp and clear. "I knew one of these children," she said, pointing to a photograph on the wall. "Anna Kowalski. We lived on the same street in Warsaw. We played together every day. I was taken to a different camp, and I survived. She didn't. For 75 years, I thought I was the only person left who remembered her. I thought when I died, it would be as if she had never existed." The woman's voice broke. "But you've given her back to the world. You've made sure her story will outlive me, outlive all of us. You've made her immortal." Marcus embraced her gently, feeling the fragility of her aged body and the strength of her spirit. This was why Raymond had done it. For moments like this, for the knowledge that memory could triumph over death, that love could outlast time itself. The publicity from the Children's Memorial brought unprecedented attention to the foundation. Donations poured in from around the world. Universities offered to partner with the foundation on research projects. Several celebrities became advocates, using their platforms to spread awareness of the work. But with visibility came complications. Government agencies began asking questions about the provenance of items in the collection. How had Raymond acquired them? Could he prove legal ownership? Some of the items had been purchased from questionable sources, dealers who operated in grey legal areas. The foundation's lawyers worked overtime to navigate the complex international laws governing cultural property and Holocaust artifacts. There were also new claimants, people who emerged from the shadows, claiming to be descendants of families whose items were in the collection. Some were legitimate, their claims backed by documentation and DNA evidence. Others were opportunists, trying to profit from the renewed attention. Marcus had to become expert in authentication and genealogical research, learning to distinguish real family connections from fabricated ones. The most challenging case involved a set of rare books that Raymond had recovered from an estate sale in Vienna. The books had belonged to a prominent Jewish scholar named Dr. Isaac Bernstein, who had perished in Auschwitz. Raymond's notes indicated that Bernstein had 2 sons, both of whom had died in the camps, leaving no descendants. But 6 months after the memorial opened, a man named Thomas Bernstein appeared, claiming to be Isaac's grandson through a 3rd son no one had known about. He produced documents, photographs, even letters between his father and Isaac. Everything appeared legitimate. Marcus was prepared to return the books when Dr. Kovacs contacted him with disturbing news. She had done her own research and discovered that Thomas Bernstein was actually the grandson of a Nazi officer who had looted the Bernstein family library. The documents were real, but they had been stolen, not inherited. Thomas was trying to gain legal possession of items his grandfather had stolen so he could sell them. The revelation led to a court case that dragged on for 8 months. The foundation hired forensic document experts, genealogists, and historians to prove the fraud. In the end, they won. But the experience was draining and frightening. Marcus realized that as the foundation grew more prominent, it would face more attempts at exploitation. "This is part of the work now," Dr. Kovacs told him during one of their regular video calls. "Your uncle operated in obscurity, which protected him from some of these problems. But you're building something larger, more visible. That brings both opportunities and risks. You must be vigilant." Despite the challenges, the foundation flourished. In its first full year of operation, Marcus and his team returned more than 200 items to families. Each return was documented, photographed, and shared with permission on the Kost Foundation's website. The stories resonated deeply with people around the world. There was the elderly man in Australia who received his mother's wedding ring, which she had sold in 1939 to buy food for her family before they were deported. He had never met his mother. She had been pregnant with him when she was taken to the camps, and he had been born in hiding, raised by strangers. The ring was his only physical connection to her. There was the woman in Israel who received a collection of family photographs she had never seen. Her grandmother had hidden them with a Christian neighbor before being taken away, but the neighbor had died during the war, and the photographs had passed through multiple hands before Raymond found them. Seeing images of great-grandparents she had only heard about in stories, the woman said it was like watching ghosts come to life. There was the family in England, who received a Torah scroll that had belonged to their synagogue in Germany. The Nazis had destroyed the synagogue during Kristallnacht, but someone had rescued the Torah and smuggled it out of the country. For 80 years, it had been hidden in attics and basements, passed from one protector to another, until Raymond had finally traced it. The family donated it to their current synagogue, where it was restored and is still used in services today. Each return strengthened Marcus's conviction that this work mattered profoundly, but he also began to understand something his uncle had known all along. The returns were not endings. They were beginnings. They opened doors to conversations about history, identity, and memory. They helped families heal old wounds and build new connections. They transformed abstract historical tragedy into immediate human reality. One evening, working alone in the warehouse office, Marcus received an email that made his hands shake. It was from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. They wanted to honor both Raymond and Marcus with the Elie Wiesel Award, the museum's highest recognition for efforts to preserve Holocaust memory and combat genocide denial. The award ceremony would be held in 6 months, with survivors, scholars, and dignitaries in attendance. Marcus would be expected to give a speech about his uncle's work and the foundation's mission. He immediately called his mother. "They want to give us an award, Uncle Raymond and me." "That's wonderful," she said. "Raymond would have been so proud, but I can't give a speech in front of all those people. What would I even say?" His mother was quiet for a moment. "You tell them the truth, Marcus. You tell them about the man your uncle was. You tell them what you've learned. You tell them why this work matters. The words will come when you need them." Over the next several months, as Marcus prepared for the ceremony, he threw himself even deeper into the work. He wanted to be worthy of the honor, to prove that he was truly carrying forward his uncle's legacy. He traveled to Poland to visit the sites where many of the items had originated. He met with survivors and their families. He studied the history with renewed intensity, trying to understand not just the facts of what had happened, but the human reality behind those facts. The trip to Poland was particularly transformative. Walking through the remains of the Warsaw Ghetto, standing at the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau, seeing the piles of shoes and suitcases and personal effects that had been taken from victims, it all made the items in the warehouse feel even more sacred. These weren't just objects. They were pieces of lives that had been violently interrupted, fragments of a world that had been deliberately destroyed. At Auschwitz, Marcus met a survivor named Sophia Rosenzweig, who was visiting with her great-grandchildren, teaching them about their family history. When he told her about the foundation, her eyes widened. "You're Raymond Chen's nephew? The one, continuing his work? You knew my uncle? He found my family's candlesticks, the ones my mother lit every Sabbath until the night we were taken away. I thought they were gone forever, melted down or sold. But Raymond found them in an antique shop in Berlin and returned them to me 20 years ago. Because of him, I light those same candlesticks every Friday night. My great-grandchildren will inherit them, and they will remember." She gripped Marcus's hand with surprising strength. "Your uncle saved more than objects. He saved memory. He saved connection. He saved pieces of our souls. Promise me you'll continue. Promise me you won't let this work die." "I promise," Marcus said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. When the day of the award ceremony finally arrived, Marcus stood backstage at the Holocaust Memorial Museum, his hands sweating, his heart pounding. The auditorium was filled with more than 500 people. His mother sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Ruth Rosenberg was there, wearing her father's pocket watch. David Bergman and his family had come. Dr. Kovacs had flown in from Budapest. Dozens of families who had received items through the foundation filled the seats. When his name was called, Marcus walked to the podium on shaking legs. He looked out at the sea of faces and felt paralyzed. Then his eyes fell on the photograph of his uncle that hung on the screen behind him. Raymond in his younger years, smiling, holding a box of recovered photographs. The words came. "My uncle Raymond never wanted recognition," Marcus began, his voice steadier than he expected. "He worked in secret for 40 years because he believed the work itself was the reward. He didn't save memories and return artifacts because he wanted medals or awards. He did it because he believed it was right. Because he believed that every life matters, every story deserves to be told, and love, true love, never abandons the people we've lost." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When I first opened the warehouse after his death, I didn't understand. I saw boxes and papers and objects, and I couldn't comprehend why my uncle had devoted his entire life to collecting what others called junk. But then I met Ruth Rosenberg, and I watched her hold her father's pocket watch for the first time in 78 years. I saw her tears. I heard her say, 'Papa.' And in that moment, I understood. That watch wasn't junk. It was a bridge across time. It was proof that her father had existed, that he had been loved, that he mattered. My uncle built thousands of those bridges. He connected past and present, the dead and the living, grief and healing." Marcus's voice strengthened as he continued. "The Holocaust tried to erase an entire people. It tried to destroy not just lives, but memory itself. The Nazis didn't just murder millions. They stole their possessions, burned their homes, erased their names from official records. They wanted to make it as if these people had never existed at all. But they failed. They failed because people like my uncle refused to let them succeed. Every photograph Raymond preserved, every artifact he returned, every name he documented, each one was an act of defiance against forgetting. Each one said, 'You were here. You mattered. You are remembered.'" He looked directly at the survivors in the audience. "The foundation my uncle started, and that I'm honored to continue, is not just about objects. It's about dignity. It's about honoring the lives that were stolen and ensuring that those lives continue to teach us, inspire us, challenge us to be better. When we return a child's toy to the last surviving family member, we're not just giving back a possession. We're saying, your child was real. Your loss was real. Your grief matters. And we remember. Marcus took a deep breath. My uncle left me more than a warehouse full of artifacts. He left me a mission, a purpose, and a community of people who believe that some things are more important than profit or convenience, or conventional success. He taught me that a single life spent in service to others is worth more than 100 lives spent in pursuit of personal gain. He taught me that memory is sacred, and he taught me that love, expressed through action, can outlast death itself. He held up the plaque he had just received. This award has my name on it alongside my uncle's, but it belongs to so many others, to Dr. Helena Kovacs, and all the members of the Guardians who helped Raymond for decades, to my mother, who chose compassion over comfort when she decided to join this work, to every volunteer, every donor, every person who has supported the foundation, and most of all, to the families, the survivors, the descendants, the ones who have waited decades for pieces of their history to come home. This award is yours. This mission is yours. And I promise you, as I promised my uncle, that the work will continue. The forgotten will be remembered, and love will never let go. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes. People were crying openly, clutching each other, some calling out names of lost family members. Marcus stepped away from the podium and was immediately surrounded by survivors, wanting to thank him, to share their stories, to express their gratitude. But through the crowd, he saw someone who made him stop. An elderly woman, standing alone near the back of the room, staring at him with an intensity that was almost frightening. She looked to be in her 90s, rail-thin, leaning on a cane, but her eyes were fierce and alert. When the crowd finally dispersed, Marcus approached her. "Can I help you? You are Raymond Chen's nephew." "Yes, ma'am. My name is Sarah Klein," she said, and Marcus's heart stopped. "I am the woman who showed your uncle that first photograph. I am the reason he started all of this." Marcus couldn't speak. He had thought Sarah Klein was long dead. She would have to be over 100 years old. "I am 103, she said, as if reading his mind. "And I came here today because I needed to meet you. I needed to tell you something about your uncle that I never told anyone else." She gestured to a quiet corner, and Marcus helped her to a chair. When they were seated, she took his hand in hers. Her grip was weak, but there was purpose in it. "When I met Raymond in 1968, I was a broken woman," she began. "I had survived the camps, but barely. Everyone I loved was dead. My husband, my parents, my 3 children, all murdered. I had nothing left but a single photograph and an ocean of grief. Most days, I didn't want to live. I had survived for no reason, to no purpose." Her voice was soft but clear. "Your uncle was a young soldier, barely 25 years old. He had seen nothing of real suffering. And yet, when I showed him that photograph and told him about all that had been lost, he wept. This strong young man wept for my own children, for my family, for all the stolen lives. And then he said something I have never forgotten. He said, 'I cannot bring them back, but I can make sure the world remembers them. Will you help me do that?' Sarah Klein's eyes filled with tears. "He gave me a purpose when I had none. For the next 35 years, until my health failed, I worked with your uncle. I helped him research families, authenticate items, translate documents. He saved my life by giving me something to live for. And now you are doing the same thing for others. You are giving people purpose through memory. That is the greatest gift anyone can give." She reached into her bag and pulled out an old photograph. worn at the edges but carefully preserved. It showed a young Sarah with her 3 children, all smiling, all alive. "This is the photograph I showed your uncle that day. I want you to have it. I want it to be in your museum, in that room dedicated to the children. My babies are there, on your wall. And, now, this photograph should be there too, so people can see them, as I remember them. Alive, happy, loved." Marcus took the photograph with shaking hands. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. I am old. I will die soon. But if this photograph is in your museum, my children will live forever. That is all any mother can ask." They sat together for a long time, this ancient survivor and the young man who had inherited her friend's mission, connected by the invisible threads of memory and purpose that Raymond Chen had spent his life weaving. When Sarah Klein finally stood to leave, she touched Marcus's cheek gently. "Your uncle was the best man I ever knew. He saw the worst of humanity and responded with the best of humanity. You are doing the same. God bless you, child. God bless this holy work." Marcus watched her leave, then looked down at the photograph in his hands. 3 children frozen in time, their lives stolen but their memory preserved. He thought about his uncle, about all the years of patient work, about the thousands of lives touched by one man's decision to care, when no one else did. The stories would be told, and the dead would be remembered by the living, as they should be, as they deserved to be, as they would always be. Because Uncle Raymond's warehouse was never about hoarding or obsession. It was about love. And love, true love, never lets go. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.